There are two things that we need to wrap up today. The first thing I want you to focus on is your Section 3 notes for Chapter 22. On Friday, we did a web quest on coevolution. And although some of the examples were focusing on animal-animal relationships, we're really going to focus in on those relationships between animals and plants, and how, especially in the flowering plants, those relationships allow the plants to be able to thrive. So anytime we're talking about one of these relationships where it seems as though the animals and plants interact with each other in such a way that they develop this bond or relationship that allows them to thrive, we call that coevolution. Essentially looking at the structures that the plant has and looking at the structures that the animal has and how they adapt to each other and change over time. So when we're looking at flowering plants, and we look at some of their pollinators, we notice that the structures that the flower needs to reproduce coincides directly with the structures that insects or mammals or birds have that allow them to be able to gather that reproductive structure and transfer it to another plant. So if we're looking at the production of flowers and fruits, those are actually the reproductive structures that are going to be necessary. And in the meantime, the insects, the birds, the mammals are using part of that plant for food, but also unintentionally gathering some of their reproductive structures and carrying it to the next plant that they move along to. So here are some examples in your notes, and you can see them a little bit clearer on your notes or on the PowerPoint than you can on your notes. But if we're looking at all of the structures or all of the mouth parts of these animals. A butterfly, for example, has this long mouth part that we call a proboscis. It's like a long straw, and it can use that to feed on the nectar of flowers. Well, when it's landing on this flower, it's inadvertently picking up some of that pollen. The same is true for any of these examples. The hummingbird has that long, slender beak with a long tongue. Bats also have an extremely long tongue, and some of that pollen with this saguaro cactus can actually get caught in the bat's fur as well. So when we're looking at the two together, we're looking at how those structures co-evolve in such a way that it helps benefit the reproduction of the flowering plants. So without pollination, the transition or the next generation of those flowering plants would not happen. And so when we're talking about different types of pollination, wind pollination, which it's been super windy the past couple days, if it was breeding season for plants and we were in like full force for spring, there would be a high pollen count in the air right now. So wind pollination is definitely essential to the survival of some of these plants. If we're looking at the dandelion that's on the PowerPoint there, those little tufts of that seed are adapted in such a way that they can be transported easily by the wind. Excuse me. So if you look at the base of that, you can see these tiny little seeds that are being transported. So when you were a kid and you used to blow these and blow the tufts off of that flower, you are unintentionally releasing all of these seeds. And so this is why your dad or mom probably got super mad, because then all of these are going to disperse elsewhere in your yard and they're going to germinate and develop into more dandelions. And we see dandelions as kind of this icky weed that shouldn't be found in our landscaping. But those seeds are adapted to be able to be dispersed by the wind. If we're looking at animal pollination, this is where we mostly see that coevolution. So looking at examples of coevolution, we're looking specifically at what we call vector pollination. This is pollination that is through the direct action of an animal. And so the animal is responsible, and like I said, oftentimes it doesn't know it. It just might be there to get food. But it's inadvertently transferring the male gametophyte to the female gametophyte of a different plant. If we're looking at seed dispersal, okay, just as there are different methods for pollination, there are different methods for the scattering of seeds away from the parent plant. We don't want the plant to just drop its seeds directly by the parent, because then it's going to compete with the other parent plant. And so as a result, to kind of alleviate some of that competition, the plant is going to have some method of dispersing seeds. So by doing so, the seedlings that are developing are not going to compete with the parent plant for vital resources. So a lot of times we think of competition between two animals, but plants also compete for those vital resources that we talked about when we reviewed photosynthesis. They're competing for sunlight. So if they're directly under the parent plant, that parent plant is going to cause a lot of shade. And that seedling, if it's directly underneath it, is not going to get enough sunlight to photosynthesize. They're going to compete for water. So the roots, as they're going underground, are going to compete to take up space, and also nutrients that are absorbed from the soil. So competition also occurs in the plant kingdom as well as the animal kingdom. If we're looking at the different ways that seeds can travel, we're looking at wind pollination or wind dispersal. They can be dispersed by animals. So if you've ever been walking through a wooded area and you get these, what my grandma used to call burrs, you get these burrs that are stuck to your pants and your shoes and your shoestrings and your socks. That's an advantage because those are the seeds. And so when you're moving from place to place, think about animals that are going into that area as well and transporting those seeds. Some of them can be dispersed by water. So there are examples there of cattails, coconuts, and lotus. By bursting open, okay? So violets, irises would do the same thing, and even by humans, okay? So if we're looking at different types of beans or wheat, a lot of these seeds are saved and then dispersed accordingly. If you think about animal waste, like if a squirrel is feeding on a seed, that seed can actually travel through its digestive tract without being harmed. And so it seems gross to us, but when it releases that waste in the form of feces, that seed can actually germinate wherever that squirrel ended up releasing that waste. So when we're looking at dispersal, this allows different plants to colonize different environments. And so if we're looking at the animal plant evolution here, we're looking at how they link together. So this coevolution allows the seeds of fruits or other flowering plants to be able to disperse in regions where they might otherwise not be able to thrive. So this is why flowers have things like pleasant taste in the nectar, attractive colors. Okay, so those colors are used to attract different species. If you've ever had clover that grows in your landscaping, you can actually pull the end off of the flowers, and when you bite down on them, they taste like honey. This is where we get clover honey. That's through the pollination of bees that are feeding heavily and dispersing those seeds of the clover from one region to the next. Okay, so coevolution is pretty simple to understand, but there are specific examples, and I'm interested to see when I collect your web quest, I'm interested to see what examples you were able to kind of research and come up with when you were looking on your own. One other thing that you need to finish up today is your seed ID and dissection lab. We're going to wrap that up. And so when you look at that, you should have that whole first page completed. What you are working on today is the back of that first page. So once you get your notes filled in, you will see what we call a dichotomous key. And this dichotomous key is essentially a set of paired statements. So you are going to be getting a petri dish that has several different beans in it. And your goal is to classify these beans based on your dichotomous key. So let's say I'm starting with one of my beans and I pull it out and I'm going to look at paired statements 1A and 1B. And so on your paper it says 1A is your bean round. If yes, go to number 2. If it is bean shaped, go to number 4. So you're going to follow that. So let's say the one I have is bean shaped. So I'm going to jump down to number 4. Is it one color or is it more than one color? So you're going to answer that question and you're going to go where it tells you to. You have some options in terms of how you are putting your beans down on your paper. You can either use the tape that is on the cart by the prep room door, or there are glue sticks up on the cart as well that you can use to glue it down. The only thing that I ask is, because you're going to be attaching your beans directly to your paper, leave your papers in class. Do not try and take them with you, because some of the beans will fall off, and I don't want you to miss points because of beans being lost in the hallway or in another class. Okay. You should also have that seed dissection page completely done and those conclusion questions. So I'm going to collect this paper, the ID and the dichotomous key and dissection paper, before your test on Wednesday. So you want to be sure that you have all of that done. So that is something that you need to be working on after you finish up your notes today. If you have any questions, just send me a message in Schoology and I will try to get back with you. Continue working on that review sheet. We're going to go over the correct answers to that on Tuesday, and then your test will be on Wednesday.